Wise advice. Let's talk about bringing up children. I know that you have a toddler who keeps you busy. If you suspect that your child is sensitive or you recognize some of these traits, just give us some of the mechanisms and the ways really to deal with that, particularly when you might have people who don't think that your child is sensitive, but is perhaps just playing up and needs to be dealt with in a different way, because sometimes we do have judgment coming in from either side.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So sensitive kids are just this magical experience. Every kid's a magical experience to raise in a different way. I have a 2-year-old son, and I'm going to be happy with however he unfolds and whether he's sensitive or not. I will say that so far, I think there's a lot of signs that he might very well be a highly sensitive person. And it's a different experience raising a sensitive child. Remember that they deal with the same overstimulation that sensitive adults deal with, but they don't have any tools yet as a kid for how to deal with it. When a sensitive child misbehaves, when they throw a fit, it's almost always because of overstimulation. And if you can correct that, then you oftentimes will see the problem melt away. And meanwhile, any kind of disciplinary method that does not involve correcting the overstimulation is not going to fix it. They'll just keep crying or acting up or whatever it is. So gentle discipline is very important with a sensitive child. And it does not mean gentle discipline is still oftentimes very authoritative. It's still, well, we don't do that, and here's why. And you don't allow your child to get away with things. You don't allow them to throw tantrums. You don't allow them to hit other kids. It's a lot of saying no, just like any other parent would, but you're doing it in gentle terms. You're keeping a calm tone of voice. You're explaining where needed, why we're going to do something and not do something. A little while back, my son and I were at a grocery store, and he was walking. I had just gotten a little basket, like I didn't have a whole cart that he could sit in, so I just had a little basket because I wasn't getting that many things. But he was walking next to me. He's a little toddler, and that was fine. But I was starting to get more things than I thought I was going to get. So I had a really heavy basket. I had like a jug of milk and something else. I'm getting and he started fussing. He wanted me to pick him up and carry him. And he was tired of walking. And I couldn't. I mean, it was like, unless I'm throwing my groceries out on the floor, I'm just not doing that. And he started to escalate, and you could see the tantrum starting. It was just, he was about to just turn and start throwing a complete fit if I didn't pick him up. And I just kind of, as best I could with my stuff, I crouched down and I said, "Hey, Apollo," my son's name is Apollo. "Look, Daddy's arms are really full right now. So I can't carry you because I have all this stuff. But we're about to check out. So if you can just go with me," and I kind of pointed toward the checkouts. It's like, "If you can go with me over there and let me check out, then I can pick you up." And I did not think this was going to work. This kid was like, 18 months old at the time, 19 months old. But he looked at me, he looked at the checkout, and he goes, "Okay." And he just starts walking up to the checkout, like, no more tears. Okay. So you can be authoritative and be gentle. It goes so far with sensitive children. Maybe I'm not, maybe there are other kids who need a stronger voice, in order for the message to get through. Your sensitive child is not that kid. They already have the dial turned up. Everything you say is going to sound louder to them. It's going to sound firmer, and any criticism will hit a little harder for them because it's all turned up. They're reading more into it. So be gentle with them, but be firm, and help them get the tools to avoid overstimulation. That can be things like talking through with them what it feels like to get overstimulated, so that they know, oh, when you start to feel this way, that means you should take a break, you should go sit down, you should hang back a little bit. But it also means maybe talking to other parents. If you're taking your kid to a birthday party, you could say, "Hey, he might get overstimulated. If so, just let him come sit with the adults." And just sit down quietly for a little bit. And to tell your kid the same thing, like, "Hey, we're going to be here for 2 hours. Unfortunately, we can't leave early. But if you start to get tired or upset, just come over and sit with me with the adults. You can sit quietly and you'll feel better after about 10 minutes. Or if it's possible, tell them, if you want to leave early, we can leave early. Just let me know and give me about 10 minutes and we'll get out of there." These are ways that empower your kid to start dealing with their own overstimulation and knowing how to handle it, which not only fixes the behavior problem, but then when they're 20, 30, 40 years old, they know how to deal with their own overstimulation.
Yeah, they're learning for life. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Not to ramble on too much, but with the parent topic, I would say this. A lot of times the issue is not your child, it's the perceptions from other people. So memorize these words. If you think your child's a highly sensitive person, when you're talking to a teacher, a daycare provider, maybe another parent who's planning a party or something, these are the words you want to use. So-and-so, my son, is a pretty sensitive kid. And that's something we're trying to encourage.
I love it.
That changes the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, let's stay with teachers for a moment and overstimulation. M Bliss says, I'm convinced I'm a highly sensitive person. I teach languages in a very stimulating environment. Do you have any advice?
Ooh, yeah. So there's a lot of like specific tools that we have in the book for dealing with overstimulation in different situations, both to prevent it and to deal with it when it comes up. But there's two that especially pop to mind for me. One, it comes from a therapist who is a highly sensitive person. And, this was her dream to be a therapist. She, it works obviously very well with her sense of empathy. And then she found out she was burning out. It was just really a struggle in her case, it was the emotional overstimulation. You're taking on the problems of your patients all day long. You're feeling that pain with them. How do you turn that off when you come home? And she would just come home absolutely worn out and exhausted. In your case, it might be more of a physical overstimulation from the environment. But at the end of her workday, she would actually like envision like a bucket, right? Or something like that, where she would take each of these emotions she had picked up and say, that one actually belongs to so-and-so. I'm going to put it in that, and she would just kind of like one at a time, takes like a minute or two, just think, I'm feeling really stressed out. Where'd that come from? I'm feeling kind of afraid right now. Where'd that come from? I'm feeling so exhausted. Where did that come from? Oh, that belongs to so-and-so because you're dealing with this, and just kind of visually drop it in that file folder or that bucket or whatever it was, leave that at work and walk away. It sounds so silly, this little visualization. It works really well. You can do the same thing with physical stuff. It's like, oh, okay, I feel so overwhelmed right now. And like, okay, well, that's actually maybe because of what my boss said. That's actually maybe because I had so many kids in class today, or adults I was working with, whatever it might be, or that's maybe because we're short a staff person. You can start to take these little pieces of what you're feeling and just drop them in this bucket. But the other thing I just recommend for all sensitive people is have your sensitive sanctuary at home. And so that means a place where you feel relaxed. Could be your favorite armchair, could be your bedroom, could be the room you do your crafting in, right? And every day, maybe before work, maybe after work, take 20 minutes and do nothing. Just sit in that spot and do nothing. You want music on, you can have music playing, that's fine. But just let your mind process and do nothing else. And what's going to happen is all the overstimulation, all the emotional overload, it's going to start to let your brain catch up. It'll let your brain do the processing it couldn't do during the day. And it'll work through it. And it'll start making the connections it needs to, resolving things, setting them aside. Not only will you feel better, if it's at the end of your day, your overstimulation will start to come down. If it's the beginning of your day, it'll kind of give you a battery that gets you through the day. Not only will that happen, but you'll start to have these like aha moments. You just kind of like, oh, wait, I just realized the solution to that, because your brain is making those connections that sensitive people make.
A bit of self-compassion goes a long way. So P just briefly says, my 2-year-old is called Jackson Apollo. Nice coincidence. Thank you very much, P. Okay, so somebody asked, how do I deal with sensitivity in a relationship? How do I regulate my emotions as I feel misunderstood by my partner? Thank you.
Ooh. So I don't know if this person is able to respond in real time. I'm curious if you feel misunderstood because they don't understand your sensitivity, or like for a bigger or different reason. But I don't know if you're able to respond quickly if you're.
Okay, well, let's leave then and hope that they will. And let me pick up on a similar line of question. Well, but no, not similar, but let's pick up on this one. So Liz says, how do you support someone with depression if you're sensitive? If you need to curate your relationships, but people with difficulties also need support, even if they can't build you up in the way that you were talking about earlier?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, first off, I'm sorry you're having to deal with that somebody in your life is struggling with depression. It's a really hard thing to go through. And I've gone through that with loved ones in my life too. And you're right, you have to stand by them. You can't just cut someone out that you truly love, especially not for the reason that they're depressed. So yeah. So for one thing, you can care for them and provide for their needs and still have limits that you set. And this is something that happens to people in a lot of contexts. Sometimes it's you have a partner or a loved one who's suffering from depression or something like that. Or it might be, a lot of us have an older adult that we have to help care for. I'm not in that position, at this time, but I know a lot of people my age are, and it can be really exhausting. And you can still set limits. You can still be there for them, help them with the things they need help with, but know that, well, at 9 o'clock at night, then this is when I'm going to kind of turn off and not be available to talk about that more, or whatever the limits might be, depending on whether the person lives with you, whether it's a close friend, whether it's a parent. But set those limits, and you don't even have to tell them what they are. You don't have to be mean about it, just so you know what the limits are. Like, okay, well, if they call after 9, I can't take the call that late. I need to be coming down from that stuff and getting ready for sleep, or frankly, you won't be able to help them the next day, it's kind of that situation like putting your own oxygen mask on first in a plane. Like, you cannot help your friends get their oxygen masks on if you can't breathe. So give yourself the oxygen. But part of it is, do use those tools. Overstimulation and the emotional overload we feel when you're dealing with someone who's going through something like depression, those are in many ways the same thing. It's just different forms of the same cognitive overload. So use those tools. I would use that bucket to separate out, what are their feelings, or what kind of depression or stress are you picking up from them versus what's your own. And when you're done helping them, or maybe at the end of the night or whatever it might be, put those, like visualize putting those in a separate bucket or a separate box or container, because those are that person's, and you don't need to take those to bed with you or take those home with you or whatever the situation is. And then practice that compassion. When you start to work with a compassionate point of view, it will, I think, especially with someone with depression, where you'll have a lot of the same conversations over and over. You might have a conversation that seems positive, and then it might not seem any more hopeful to them an hour later or the next day. So it can still be exhausting. Compassion is not a cure-all, but the more you can put yourself in a position of practicing compassion, and you might even benefit from doing a compassion meditation each day, which will really help bring down the overload you feel and make it an easier experience.
And we haven't heard back from that person, but just looking at that question and also others that are coming in, I think it's to do with somebody being a sensitive person, regulating emotions by being misunderstood by people who are not quite so sensitive. And Frank, let me just pick out this. I'm about 1/3 of the way through the sensitive book at the moment. At 75 years old, it's revelatory and comforting to me to recognize so many traits in myself. I'm aware that I feel a degree of frustration, even anger, with other non-sensitive people when they exhibit non-sensitive traits towards me. What strategies should one explore in dealing with this? So I think that covers a lot of people's questions, actually.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, absolutely. In a relationship, there's no bad mix. A sensitive person, a highly sensitive person can be with a less sensitive person, and that can be a great combination. Or two highly sensitive people, or two less sensitive, doesn't matter. A lot of times we see that actually, where the more highly sensitive partner and is attracted to, and they sort of have this complementary relationship, like an opposites attract kind of thing, with a less sensitive partner. That less sensitive partner might be your rock. They might be the thing that grounds you, and they're just a source of calm and steadiness. And maybe the sensitive person brings a lot of the depth and excitement and energy to the relationship. So they can be complementary. But yes, it does lead to some pretty deep misunderstandings. I think one thing that's important to do is to, if you haven't already, is to explain to that person what sensitivity really means. And I would be watching during that conversation and after it for signs that they care, that this is the explanation, and that they're understanding it and they're taking it seriously. And that doesn't mean in the moment. I think a lot of times when you explain, I'm a sensitive person, and here's what that means, and I've been reading about the science of it, and it actually comes with these strengths, but sometimes it means I have to do this, and I don't think, I need you to understand that. The person won't always get it right away. A lot of times it's a lot to absorb, and they might not be like, seem that supportive in the moment, but then they think about it for a day or two, and they'll come back and say, oh, all right, yeah, sure. So give them a little space, to prove themselves. But I would be watching for whether that person seems to take it seriously when you explain what sensitive really means. And I would also be really clear about what you want. Like, what is it you need? You're not just telling them this so that they'll have some information. You're telling them this because there's something specific that needs to change. And it's probably a two-way thing, right? There's probably something they want you to change too, and that's fine. But the point is, it's not that you're broken and have to fix something. It's that both of you have a different style, and you're going to have to figure out a way to each make a little bit of a change, or each, maybe I'll do this for you and you do this for me. An example, so I was recently interviewed by a wonderful podcaster, and in the middle of our interview, she realized, oh my God, my wife is highly sensitive, and I never realized. And one of their ongoing conflicts that she mentioned is, they'll go grocery shopping, and halfway through the grocery trip, her wife, who as it turns out is sensitive, will just need to leave. She's like, I can't be in this place anymore. It's too much going on. She'll go sit in the car. And then it's crazy making for both of them, because, the one person doesn't want the other one to leave. And then they're texting back and forth. Oh, don't forget to get this. Okay, did you mean this or that? And it's a really big point of contention, right? And what's going to work out for them in that situation is not for either partner to just change, but for both to change. So what would have to happen in that situation is when you need to leave the grocery store, I, the less sensitive partner, will be okay with that. I won't get upset. I won't think you're abandoning me. I won't, nothing else. Just, I know you have to do that, and that's completely fine. And you, when you get to the car, are going to do one of two things. Either number one, either we made our grocery list before we came, and I'm just going to follow that list, and you're not going to text me, or you're going to trust me to get the stuff at my own discretion. And then you're not going to complain later that I didn't get something. One of those two things has to happen where they can both be supportive to the other person and both get their needs met. And that's often the case. Usually with a highly sensitive and a less sensitive partner, it's going to be that the more sensitive partner either needs more emotional discussion and more validation of their emotions when there's especially when there's a conflict, but also just an everyday conversation. And that might be really uncomfortable for the other partner. Or it's a case where their conflict is overstimulating and overwhelming for the sensitive person. And so it's going to be an issue of needing to change your conflict style and work with potentially with a couples therapist to start to change the way you do conflict so that you're fighting in a healthy way. My favorite thing, and this is something I do in my relationships, is like we talk about having a timeout and we agree in advance how that's going to work. And you can either party can call for a timeout. And what it means is it's a promise you're making. You're not just getting out of the conversation. It's not a way to avoid a difficult topic. You've basically committed to each other weeks beforehand in therapy or whatever, that when you call a timeout, like you'll still come back the next day and we'll talk about it, right? So it's not just going to make it go away. But when the person that says, hey, I need a timeout, the other person respects it. They don't throw one last zinger in there. They don't try to push the topic. They say, oh, okay, that makes sense. Can we talk about this tomorrow? Yes, we can. Okay, or in an hour or whatever it might be. And they just both take some time apart. And this works wonders because the more sensitive person can come down from that sudden spike in emotions, that sudden overstimulation. They can come down from that, and it gives them time to do their deep processing. And then you'll probably come back from that as the sensitive person, understanding your partner's perspective because you had the time to process and you have a sense of empathy. And you'll probably come back with a compromise or I often am like, actually, that's fine. I thought I didn't want to do that, but actually, if it's important to you, that's fine with me. It'll be a very different story the next day. So it ends up meeting both people's needs, but you both have to commit to it and follow it.
Within your book, there are lots of examples from all around the world. Alison says, how cultural is sensitivity? And I wonder, within that question, whether you might talk about the phrase, the concept in Korea, nunchi, which I thought was wonderful.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. So sensitivity is, it's universal. So everyone around the world has people who are more sensitive and less sensitive in their culture. But I think the way that it's viewed and regarded depends very much, it changes very much from culture to culture. I want to be really clear. I don't think that there's a specific culture that like is the best for sensitive people. Or the worst. I don't think that's how it works because our values are just different in different cultures. But there are a lot of cultures where sensitive traits are maybe valued differently. So, for example, we have one of our writers for Sensitive Refuge is a man from Brazil, and he talks a lot about how this concept of machismo is a really big issue for him as a sensitive man down there. I mean, I thought I had it rough in the United States, where of course you're expected to be tough and not be sensitive as a boy, but it's an even bigger cultural value down there. And there's a very specific way that you conduct yourself as a man to be macho, or to have machismo, I should say. And it was just a wildly different experience where that's a bigger struggle for him. We've also heard from people who, I know one reader who I believe was from Iran, talked about, when they lived in Iran versus when they lived in the United States, how their sensitivity was viewed differently. And it wasn't that it was accepted more in Iran, it was just that different parts of it were accepted more and different parts were dismissed more. So yeah, there are cultures that have a concept that might be more sensitive friendly. So nunchi in Korea is one of them. It's sort of a social sensitivity. There's also a concept a little closer to home for I think a lot of you who are in this audience. So in Ireland, and my ancestors are from Ireland. I'm not Irish, but there's a concept called crack. And crack is, we often think of it as just meaning pleasant conversation, having a good time. That is kind of partly what crack means. But there's also this element to it where it's about sensing the atmosphere and the mood, and whatever it is that you're doing in the group is going to contribute to that mood. So it's sort of contributing the right energy to the situation. And that's how you have good crack, you have a good time together, is that everyone knows, okay, this is the vibe, I'm feeling the vibe, and this is, you know, we're here to do this, and we're gonna have a good time doing it. And then the topics you bring up, the jokes you make, everything else is aimed at that. It's not going to be something that you suddenly throw a barb out at someone, or you introduce something that's going to kind of derail the vibe. It's sort of this social sensitivity. So I think there's different words for it around the world with different versions, but it's one of the ways in which we do actually value sensitivity, and probably in some cultures more than others.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much for bringing that closer to our shores, Andre. We are just about out of time, so I'd like to say thanks very much for everybody for being here today. Thanks for some really wonderful questions. I just want to finish off by saying, Wendy says, thank you so much. I have validation. I've been highly sensitive forever. So that's just one insight.
Oh, that's great.
I would like, before we say goodbye, and thank you, Andre, just to say that the dedication for sensitive is for anyone who is softer inside than they let on, which includes a lot of us in this audience, I think. So, Andre, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your book and your ideas.
Thanks for having me.